Today I'm going to show you how to make a beautiful apple pie yeast bread that is perfect for having people over for breakfast, for special occasions, for holiday mornings, anything like that. This is a really fluffy yeast dough with a lot of sugar, eggs, butter, a little bit of milk in it, which makes it super soft, but makes it still a very fluffy bread-like consistency, not too dense. And then inside, we're gonna make a sort of apple pie filling with apples and cinnamon sugar. We're gonna make little balls of dough, put that apple filling inside, and bake it up into one beautiful sandwich loaf that you can pull apart. This is such a good recipe. It is not hard to make. The only thing to keep in mind is that you need to give your dough plenty of time to rise. Anytime we're adding sugar, milk, eggs into a dough, it makes it rise a little bit slower, and that's fine. It doesn't make it any harder. It just means you have to be patient. So even though the recipe might say rise for 1 to 2 hours, and that is how it works in my kitchen on a certain day, your kitchen might be cooler, your ingredients might start colder, there's all kinds of variables. What you want to look for is what does the dough look like. Use the video as your guide. When your dough looks like that stage, that's when it's time to move on, not when a certain amount of time has passed. If you ever get stuck or if you need clarification, I'll put the recipe in the description box below, and I'll also link out to my blog where you can find step-by-step photos and all the ingredients listed out where you can print them. It's really just pantry ingredients, apples, spices, and flour, sugar, all the basics. The only thing that's a little bit unusual that you might need is this Swedish pearl sugar, which is like big things of white sugar that won't melt in the oven. It just gives the bread a really pretty appearance, but you don't need it. I just get that on Amazon, and I'll link to where you can find it. Other than that, you probably have everything else on hand. So I'm gonna walk you through the process of this step by step. Again, it's easy, it just takes time. Come along, and I hope you enjoyed this recipe. It is super cold here, and this is the perfect thing to warm us up. If you've ever made a brioche, this is really similar to a brioche dough where we're gonna be adding a lot of stuff into it. So I'm gonna start with my flour. We're doing 2.5 cups of just regular all-purpose flour, 1/3 of a cup of milk, and 1/3 of a cup of water. I find that mixing a little bit of water in just makes it lighter and helps it rise a little bit faster. So now I'm gonna do 2 eggs. This is gonna give it a really nice, rich color, makes it really golden and pretty. And then we're gonna do 2 tablespoons of butter. You really want the butter to be room temperature, just so that it can mix up and get incorporated into the dough easier, but you don't want it melted. So this is 2 tablespoons. I always use instant yeast whenever I bake bread. I just get a bench, put it in a jar like this, I measure it out. The active dry in the packets is fine too. This recipe uses 1.5 teaspoons, which makes a packet sort of annoying, which is why I always buy it in bulk. But anyway, I'm just gonna dump that right in. I do not proof it. I don't mix it with water, sugar, or anything beforehand. I put it right in the ingredients. Trust me, it will be fine, even if you're using regular active dry yeast. So all that I need to worry about now is my salt and sugar. So I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of sugar. The bread is gonna be not super sweet. It's a little bit sweet, but most of the sweetness is gonna come from the apple filling and from the sugar that we're gonna put on top. I don't want too much sugar in the dough. It'll make it too heavy and almost like a cake. I don't want that. I want it to be fluffy like a bread. And finally, about a teaspoon of salt. Now, since this dough is a little bit on the sticky side, I prefer to mix this in my stand mixer. If you have a bread machine, that would be really great too. Just do it on the dough cycle. But I'm gonna mix this in here, and then I'm gonna check and see if the consistency is right or if I need to add a little more flour or water. Okay, so this is, I really actually don't think it's too dry. I'm gonna add just like a drop of water. Like this is not even a teaspoon. This is like 2 drops. I just kind of wanna make this come together in a ball and smooth out a little bit faster. See how it's just rough looking? I just don't like that. So now I'm happy with the consistency of this. It's becoming more of a dough. I do not, I really didn't need to add that water because there's this butter hiding in here and that would have been enough moisture. Anyway, I'm gonna let it knead. I'm confident that I don't need to add much more, any flour or any liquids. So I'm gonna let the machine run and knead this for 5 minutes, and then I'm going to come back and start the rising process. Okay, so I let this machine run for about 5 minutes. You can see I have a huge dramatic difference in the dough. It's really smooth, looks basically like a traditional bread dough. A little bit of color difference from those eggs. I want to let this do its first rise. I am going to just shape this loosely into a ball. I wouldn't even say loosely, but just what I'm trying to say is don't obsess over shaping this into a ball. Just shape it and make it look like a ball. I'm gonna pop this in here in a clean bowl to rise. And this is gonna rise for about an hour, maybe a little bit more since there's so much in here. It may take a bit longer. I'm just gonna give my bowl a really quick spray with Pam so I can get that dough out easily and it won't stick. I'm gonna pop this in here, cover it with plastic wrap, and put this in my oven. I warm it up just for a minute and then turn it off, put the dough in the oven, let it rise, and when it's doubled, we will move on to the next step. While that dough is rising, the next step is just to create your apple filling. So all this is 3 apples, diced up, pretty small, so that they're way smaller than bite size, smaller than like what you'd have in an apple pie. And then we're gonna mix this with 2 tablespoons of sugar and a teaspoon of cinnamon. You wanna cook this over low heat until the apples are really soft, because what we're really trying to avoid is in the middle of your soft bread dough, you have like a crunchy apple. We don't want that at all. We want it soft like an apple pie filling. You don't wanna add any more liquid to this if you can avoid it. So I put these on the heat, and usually the juices in the apples is plenty, but if you see that it's scorching, add just a tiny bit of water. And the reason we're trying to keep the liquid down is we don't want this filling to be overly wet and we fill bread dough with it, and then as the bread is baking, it introduces all this moisture and our bread stays doughy in the center. We don't want that. We wanna keep the moisture to a minimum. So, a little bit of moisture from the apples is to be expected, but try to avoid adding any liquid if you can. This is gonna only take a few minutes. Then you can just set it aside while the bread finishes rising. And in about an hour, we will assemble and fill our loaf. Okay, so the dough has risen until it is doubled in size and really puffy. And our next step is to shape this loaf. And what we need to do first is divide this amount of dough into 12 equal pieces. They don't have to be exactly perfectly even. So what I'm gonna do here is divide this into quarters and then each quarter into thirds. Our next step, once we have this done, is just to flatten each of these balls into like a flat disc. And what we're basically making are 12 little apple dumplings that we're then gonna arrange into the loaf pan. And they are gonna come together to form one big loaf with individual pieces that are filled with apple. So we're gonna stretch this out. You can use a rolling pin for this, but you don't have to. Sometimes it's quicker just to do it by hand. And then each of these pieces of dough just needs about 1.5 teaspoons of apple filling. You don't want too much in each because you still want this to rise and bake up like a loaf. So I do want to pinch these closed. And then we're gonna arrange these so that the apple part and the seam is on the bottom. So it's gonna go like this. And then we'll just keep filling up this loaf. There's no need to worry about what these look like. If you have any extra liquid in this apple mixture, don't pour it into the dough. Just leave it in the container. Too much liquid is gonna make it hard for the dough to bake through, and it's gonna end up being kind of wet and gooey, which you definitely don't want. Which is why we don't wanna overdo this filling in general. So apple side down, seam side up. You're gonna find that you have to sort of squish these in after a certain point, and that's fine. So once this is done, I'm gonna cover this with plastic wrap and let it rise again in a warm place. I'm just gonna use that same spot where my dough was rising, a warm oven that's turned off. So you don't want it any hotter than like 100 degrees, just like a really warm room temperature, but not running. And then this one will be a little bit quicker. I'd say an hour or even less. And And at that point, we're really almost done. All that's left to do is top and bake. So let me just wrap this up here. Okay, so now the hard part is over. We are just gonna let this rise one more time, and I'll be back in about an hour so we can top this and bake it off. So the second rise here took about an hour. This loaf is now right up to the edge of this bread pan. And all I'm gonna do before baking is put a little bit of butter on top, and then this really pretty, this is called Swedish pearl sugar. These are really big pieces of sugar that aren't gonna melt in the oven. So when it comes out of the oven, it's gonna have a really pretty brown top, and then these really bright white sugary bits. So this is just 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm gonna dice this up a little bit and sprinkle it on top. If you don't wanna add this, you don't have to. It's really just for looks to help it brown. So you could do a little bit less, or you could skip it altogether. Just gonna kind of sprinkle this here. And then I'm gonna do a lot of this pearl sugar, just because it adds so much to the look. If you don't have this, you can do just, if you have sparkling sugar that's like the bigger squares, that works. You could do plain sugar, or you could even do sesame seeds. It gives that same sort of pretty look. Just don't do salt, like pretzel salt, which is what this looks like. Don't do that. So I'm just gonna pop this guy in the oven. I have the oven preheated to 375 degrees, and I'm gonna check on this in about 30 minutes. I think it's gonna take a little bit longer, and you have to be careful because it's going to look super duper brown because of this butter, but that doesn't mean that it's baked through. So I'm gonna pop it in the oven, check on it in 30 minutes, but it's probably gonna be more like 35 or 40, and I will come back and show you when it's done. So our loaf is done. This ended up taking right around 35 minutes. You can see it has a really, really pretty golden top, lots of bright white sugar on it. And what you're gonna wanna do when it comes out of the oven is let it cool in the pan for about 10 or 15 minutes. That just makes it easier to remove, and it comes out as one loaf better instead of sort of falling apart with all that apple filling. So I'm just gonna run a butter knife across here, right here. Needs a little help. A lot of times the bottom is fine, and where it will stick is the very top. Hopefully that'll do it. Okay, so here's my loaf. I'm just gonna flip it over. So right now, since it's cooled in the pan for about 15 minutes, it's still hot, but it's not too hot to handle. And the way I like to serve this is warm. So at this stage, after it's baked and cooled in the pan, and then you let people just pull off the piece that they want. And that is just a super easy way to serve it. You can slice it if you prefer, but I find that serving it as a pull apart bread is better. And that really is it. So there are a lot of steps, and what I really recommend doing is just breaking this into 2 days, doing that dough in the afternoon, letting it rise overnight in the fridge, and then coming back and finishing this in the morning. But I really hope you enjoy this recipe. You'll find the full instructions in the description box below the video, and I'll also link out to where you can print it out yourself. But it's easy, no weird ingredients, and just a really pretty and enjoyable loaf for fall. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you have a great day.